In Edge Animate, animation involves changing the properties of an element and marking those changes using keyframes. Once you master the Properties panel as well as using keyframes, you'll find that animations are not hard to create. In fact, Edge Animate makes it really simple. The program even provides additional options to save you time and make working on your composition even easier. In this lesson, we're going to learn about viewing the timeline when you have multiple elements in animation, replacing images in your composition, copying and pasting animations, applying eases to elements, clipping animations, and animating shadows. Now that you know how to create animations in Edge Animate, you can create a lot of animations. As a matter of fact, you can add 20 elements to the stage, then animate every single one of them if you want. The only problem is that when you have that many elements and that many animations, it can be hard to find the element that you need to view or the animation you need to edit in the timeline when you need it. In the next two sections, we're going to show you 2 ways to make viewing your timeline easier, especially when your compositions are large. When you have several elements on the stage, you may not be able to see all the elements in the timeline panel. To fix this problem, you can collapse lanes that you aren't using. As you can see, we have lanes for the stage and then each of our 2 elements. By clicking any of the downward-facing triangles to the right of the lanes, we can collapse them. As your animations grow longer, you may not be able to see the animation for all elements on the timeline. For example, our timeline only shows some of the composition. If you have animations that occur after 6 seconds, you won't be able to see them without using the slider at the bottom of the timeline panel. That's fine and it works, but you're still not able to see all of your animations. When you zoom out on the timeline, you're able to see the bigger picture. Instead of just the first bit of animation, you can see a lot more. The opposite is also true. You can also zoom in to see particular elements or animations close up. To zoom so that the timeline fits the window, click the Zoom Timeline to Fit button. This button is located at the bottom right corner of the timeline panel. As you can see, the timeline is shrunk so that you can see the entire length. To zoom out on the timeline, click the Zoom Out icon. This button is located to the right of the Zoom Timeline to Fit button. To zoom in on the timeline, click the Zoom In icon. This is located to the far right of the Zoom Timeline to Fit button. Remember that images that appear in your composition come from the Library panel. The Library panel lists the images by name. However, it doesn't store those images. It stores the location of those images. The location is typically an image folder. The location for the image is what is actually placed in your composition. This means that you can easily change an image in your composition on the stage. To do this, select the element that represents the image you want to change. Go to the Properties panel and click the Change Image Source button. You'll then see the Library Assets window appear by your mouse cursor. This window contains other images that are listed in the Library panel. Choose the image that you want to replace the current image with. If you want to use a particular animation in more than one part of your composition, you can do so by copying and pasting the animation. Using the timeline, you can copy a single property change for an element. You can also copy multiple changes. To copy an animation, shift-click on the keyframes that you want to copy. Right-click, and then select Copy from the context menu. To paste an animation, select the element in the timeline where you want to paste the animation. Move the playhead to the point in the timeline where you want the animation to appear. Right-click and then choose Paste from the context menu. You can also use special paste options when using Paste. These options give you the ability to control how the animations are applied. To see the special paste options, right-click in the timeline where you want to place the animation, then choose Paste Special. The 4 types of special paste options are number 1, Paste Transitions to Location. This is the default paste. It pastes the animation so that animations end at the target. Number 2 is Paste Transitions from Location. This pastes the animations so they start at the current target. Number 3 is Paste Inverted. This pastes animations so they end at the current target, then switch directions. And number 4 is Paste All. This ages the animations in the element from which you copied the animation as well. In other words, it creates a duplicate element and animation in your timeline. Easing is the rate of change or motion of an element over time. An element may accelerate and it may decelerate. It can also bounce, oscillate, zigzag, etc. While keyframes let Edge Animate know where an animation begins and ends, easing is how your element gets from one keyframe to the next. Without it, your animation will be smooth and linear. There won't be any acceleration or deceleration or bouncing. As we mentioned several times at earlier points in the course, Edge Animate uses JavaScript, HTML5, and CSS. Both JavaScript and CSS are used to create easings. CSS uses the properties transition and animation to specify the easing function to be used. In Edge Animate, the easings are found in the Timeline panel. Select an element in the Timeline panel and then right-click on the animation span for that element. Choose Easing from the context menu. You'll then see the types of eases available. The first column displays the types of eases available, and the second column displays the motion paths for the easing. Let's choose Bounce. Click outside of the Easing menu to close it. You can then preview your animation by hitting the spacebar. By definition, clipping is an animation effect used to veil or unveil elements on the stage. You can make the element appear from left to right or top to bottom. You do this using the clipping tool. The clipping tool is found in the Tools panel. To use the clipping tool, click on it in the Tools panel and then click on an element on the stage. As you can see, the bounding box around the element is green when the clipping tool is selected. Now click and drag on the handles or squares on the bounding box. This selects the area that you want clipped. The gray area with the diagonal lines, which are barely visible, will be the area that's clipped or veiled. Now go to the Timeline panel and make sure that the Pen tool is activated. Drag the playhead to determine the length of this animation. Since you're using the Pen tool, you'll see the yellow bar with arrows in it. Now go back to the stage. We already clipped or veiled part of the element, so let's unveil it. Grab the middle selector and drag it over the gray area so the element is unclipped. You can now play your animation by hitting the spacebar. Earlier in this course, we learned how to add drop shadows to elements on the stage. Now we're going to learn how to animate those drop shadows. Here we have a rectangle element. You can see the slight drop shadow that we've added to it. The drop shadow appears on the right and bottom sides of the rectangle. We want to expand the shadow as the animation plays out. To do this, we'll edit the shadow properties. The properties for this drop shadow appear in the Properties panel under Shadow. We'll need to adjust the X and Y coordinates to make the shadow expand. We do this first by adding beginning keyframes for both the X and Y coordinates. We click the diamond beside the X coordinate and then the diamond beside the Y coordinate. If we look at our timeline, we can see the keyframes have been added. Now we can move the playhead to the location where we want the animation to end. Now we go back to the Properties panel and adjust the values for the X and Y coordinates. If we look at the timeline, we can see our ending keyframes. Now our animation is complete. Press the spacebar to preview the animation.